When Judge Andrew Adrenon tried to publicly mock Pam Bondi in court, he thought it was just another power play until Bondi exposed a secret that led to his immediate arrest in front of everyone. The mahogany doors of Courtroom 7A swung open as Judge Andrew H. Stone swept in his black robes billowing behind him. The packed gallery fell silent, immediately recognizing the notoriously strict federal judge's presence. At 62, Stones carried himself with the confidence of a man who had spent 23 years on the bench accumulating both power and enemies. All rise. The bailiff announced, his voice echoing through the high-ceiling chamber. The case United States versus Harrington Industries had drawn national attention for weeks. Accusations of corporate fraud, environmental violations, and political bribery had dominated headlines. Judge Stones had been assigned the case after 2 judges had recused themselves, citing conflicts of interest. Seated at the prosecution's table, Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi arranged her documents with methodical precision. At 56, Bondi had built a reputation as a formidable prosecutor with an uncompromising approach to corporate misconduct. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a professional shiny, her navy suit crisp and immaculate. "The court recognizes the prosecution," Judge Stones announced, peering over his reading glasses. His tone carried an edge of impatience that was unmistakable to regular observers of his courtroom. Bondi rose confidently. "Your Honor, the prosecution moves to introduce newly discovered evidence related to offshore accounts linked directly to Harrington Industries Executive Board. These documents demonstrate a clear pattern of Ms. Bondi." Judge Stones interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you suggesting that your office somehow discovered critical evidence after filing charges? This isn't a television drama where the prosecutor finds smoking guns." During commercial breaks, several attorneys exchanged glances. Stones' antagonism toward Bondi had been rumored in legal circles, but this public display surprised even courthouse veterans. "Your Honor," Bondi continued evenly, "these financial records were obtained through proper channels following the execution of warrants approved by Judge Martinez last week. The timing is convenient, isn't it?" Stones cut in again, removing his glasses dramatically. "Perhaps next week you'll discover Jimmy Hawes remains in the defendant's basement." Nervous laughter rippled through the defense table. Bondi's junior associate stiffened, but she maintained her composure with respect. "Your Honor, the prosecution's motion is both procedurally sound and substantively relevant. Supreme Court precedent in Davidson v. Illinois clearly establishes I don't need a first-year law school lecture on precedent." Ms. Bondi, Stone snapped, "I've been applying Davidson since before you passed the bar." The courtroom tensed. Judge Stone's reputation for strictness was well known, but this bordered on personal animus. Defense counsel sat back, seemingly pleased by the judge's hostile treatment of the prosecution. "Your motion is denied," Stones declared, banging his gavel with unnecessary force. "This court won't entertain 11th-hour fishing expeditions designed to salvage a flimsy case." Bondi remained standing. "Your Honor, I respectfully request that the basis for denial be entered into the record." A muscle twitched in Stone's jaw. "The basis, counselor, is judicial discretion, something you might want to familiarize yourself with before your next appearance in my courtroom." As Bondi took her seat, she exchanged a meaningful glance with her chief deputy. The first skirmish had ended in the judge's favor, but something in Bondi's measured response suggested the battle was far from over. The morning session grew increasingly tense as Judge Stones continued to undercut the prosecution at every turn. Each time Bondi rose to speak, his interruptions became more pointed, his dismissals more personal. The pattern was obvious to everyone in the courtroom. The judge was deliberately attempting to humiliate the Attorney General. Monday. Stone's draw after sustaining the defense's third consecutive objection. "Perhaps you could enlighten us all. Did you personally handle the preparation for today's hearing, or did you delegate it to the same staff who bungled the Westmore case last spring?" A sharp intake of breath swept through the gallery. The Westmore case, a corruption prosecution that had ended in dismissal, had been handled by a completely different division of the Attorney General's office. Bondi had not been directly involved, yet Stones was clearly trying to associate her with the failure. "Your Honor," Bondi replied with remarkable restraint, "the prosecution team for this case has thoroughly prepared based on substantial evidence of wrongdoing. The Westmore matter involved different attorneys and entirely different circumstances." Stones leaned forward, his fingers forming a steeple beneath his chin. "Indeed, because from where I sit I see the same pattern of overreach and under-preparation." He gestured toward the defense table. "Counsel for Harrington Industries shouldn't have to defend against shifting allegations and moving targets." Bondi's second chair, Martin Reeves, subtly pushed a note in front of her. She glanced down without changing her expression, then returned her attention to the judge. "For the record," she stated clearly, The prosecution objects to the characterization of our case as shifting or unprepared. We have filed all motions in accordance with federal rules, and have disclosed all evidence according to discovery requirements. Stones chuckled the sound entirely. Devoid of humor, noted for the record, counselor. I'm sure the appellate court will find your objection fascinating reading when this case inevitably reaches them after your office's overcharging results in reversible error. Several spectators exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even the court reporter paused momentarily, her fingers hovering above her stenotype machine. Your Honor, Bondi continued, her voice level. May I request a brief sidebar? Denied, Stones replied immediately. There's nothing you need to say that can't be heard by everyone present. He gestured broadly to the packed courtroom. Transparency is essential to our justice system, wouldn't you agree, Miss Bondi? Behind her professional demeanor, a flicker of calculation crossed Bondi's face. She nodded once to her team before responding. I couldn't agree more about transparency, Your Honor, she answered, her voice taking on a new edge of determination. In fact, transparency is precisely what this case is about. Judge Stones narrowed his eyes slightly, perhaps sensing something in her tone. He glanced at his watch ostentatiously. Well, since we're getting nowhere with the prosecution's inadequate motions, let's break for lunch. Court will reconvene at 1:30. He banged his gavel and stood to leave as the gallery began to clear. Bondi's team huddled closely together, speaking in urgent whispers across the room. Reporters scribbled furiously in notebooks, clearly aware they were witnessing something unprecedented. The defense attorneys, initially pleased by the judge's hostility toward the prosecution, now exchanged uneasy looks. Something about Bondi's composed reaction to the judicial onslaught suggested she wasn't as defenseless as Judge Stone seemed to believe. When court reconvened after lunch, the atmosphere had shifted suddenly. The gallery had filled beyond capacity, with several additional reporters squeezing into the back row. Bondi's team returned with 2 additional attorneys. No one recognized an stack of blue folders that hadn't been present during the morning session. Judge Stone swept in with the same imperious air, seemingly unaware of the changed dynamics. Miss Bondi, are you prepared to move forward without wasting more of this court's time? He asked, the mockery in his voice unmistakable. Yes, Your Honor, Bondi replied, rising with deliberate slowness. The prosecution requests permission to address a matter of immediate concern regarding these proceedings. Stones waved his hand dismissively. Make it quick, counselor. The defense has actual substantive motions awaiting our attention. Bondi nodded to one of her assistants, who approached the bench with a bound document. Your Honor, I'd like to formally request that you recuse yourself from this case effective immediately. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Judge Stone's face flushed crimson. On what possible grounds? He demanded, voice rising. On the grounds of demonstrable bias, undisclosed conflicts of interest, and what appears to be a personal financial stake in the outcome of these proceedings, Bondi stated calmly, her voice carried clearly through the now silent courtroom. This is preposterous. Stone sputtered, banging his gavel repeatedly. I'll hold you in contempt before you do, Your Honor. Bondi continued unruffled. I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A in the document before you. It contains records of 17 separate financial transactions between Meridian Holdings, a shell company registered to your brother-in-law, and a subsidiary of Harrington Industries. The judge froze, gavel in midair. Additionally, Bondi pressed on. Exhibits B through F contain sworn affidavit from 3 former clerks detailing conversations in which you expressed personal animus toward me, dating back to the Coastal Petroleum investigation of 2019, which implicated several of your former law partners. The courtroom had become so quiet that the software of the air conditioning seemed thunderous. Even the defense attorney sat in stunned silence. These documents were filed with the Judicial Conduct Committee 40 minutes ago, Bondi explained, her voice steady but resolute. Copies have also been provided to the Chief Judge of this district and the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section. For the first time since proceedings began, Judge Stones appeared genuinely shaken. His earlier arrogance evaporated as he flipped through the pages before him. This is a desperate attempt to judge shop," he finally managed, but his voice lacked conviction. Bondi stood her ground. "The prosecution has no interest in judge shopping, Your Honor. We simply require a neutral arbiter as guaranteed by the Constitution and the judicial canons of ethics." She turned slightly, addressing her words to the entire courtroom. "The evidence will show that Harrington Industries engaged in systematic fraud that harmed thousands of Americans. That evidence deserves fair consideration, nothing more, nothing less." The defense attorneys scrambled to their feet, objecting simultaneously, but their protests seemed hollow against Bondi's methodical presentation. In the back of the courtroom, a man in a dark suit who had been observing quietly made a brief phone call before returning his attention to the unfolding drama. Judge Stones appeared to be regaining his composure, straightening his robes and clearing his throat. These allegations are entirely unfounded. He declared, though with noticeably less certainty than before, this motion for recusal is denied. Bondi didn't sit down then. I must inform the court that we have filed an emergency appeal with the circuit. I believe they're considering it as we speak. As if on cue, the courtroom doors opened, and a clerk hurried in with an envelope which he delivered directly to the bench. Judge Stones broke the seal on the envelope with trembling fingers. As he read its contents, the color drained from his face. The circuit court had not only taken up the emergency appeal, but had also ordered an immediate pause in proceedings pending review of Bondi's recusal motion. This court will take a 15-minute recess, he announced, his voice strained. Without further explanation, he retreated to his chambers. The moment the door closed behind him, the courtroom erupted in hushed conversations. Defense attorneys huddled with their clients, while reporters slipped out to file urgent updates through it all. Pam Bondi remained composed, reviewing documents with her team. When Stones returned, his earlier arrogance had hardened into defiance. "Court is back in session," he declared, banging his gavel with unnecessary force. "The circuit court's administrative stay does not preclude us from addressing outstanding motions." Bondi rose immediately. "Your Honor, with respect, the stay explicitly halts all proceedings until the recusal matter is resolved. I determine what happens in my courtroom." Miss Bondi, Stones snapped. "And I'm not finished addressing your baseless accusations." Bondi nodded to her deputy, who passed her another blue folder. "Then perhaps we should discuss Exhibit G, which I was reluctant to introduce publicly." The judge froze. "What are you playing?" "At no games, Your Honor, just evidence." Bondi approached the bench and placed the folder before him. "These are records of 5 offshore wire transfers from Harrington Industries to Caribbean Holdings, ultimately controlled by Meridian Partners, the same entity mentioned earlier." The defense team rose in unison, objecting vehemently, but Bondi continued. "The timing of these transfers correlates precisely with 5 major rulings you made in cases involving Harrington subsidiaries over the past 3 years. Each ruling contradicted established precedent, each benefited Harrington enormously." A man in the third row of the gallery stood up, revealing a federal law enforcement badge to the bailiff. He moved toward the side aisle, but remained near the back of the courtroom. "These are outrageous lies," Stone sputtered, but his voice lacked conviction. "The banking records don't lie, Your Honor," Bondi replied calmly, "nor do the sworn statements from Judge Martinez and Judge Watkins attesting to conversations where you specifically requested Harrington-related cases be transferred to your docket." The courtroom had fallen completely silent. Even the defense attorney seemed stunned by the precision of the allegations. "Perhaps most concerning," Bondi continued, "is Exhibit H, a recording of your conversation with Charles Harrington at the Cypress Club last month, where you assured him that Bondi's case would never see a jury." Stone's face contorted with shock. That was a private conversation." "Indeed it was," Bondi agreed, "which makes your promise to derail a federal prosecution before evidence was even presented all the more troubling." The man with the badge was now joined by 2 others. They remained at the back of the courtroom, watching intently as the scene unfolded. Judge Stones gripped the bench so tightly his knuckles widened. "This court is adjourned until further notice," he declared, rising abruptly. "Your Honor," Bondi called out, "there's one more matter that requires immediate attention." But Stones was already halfway to his chambers, ignoring her words and the stunned expressions of everyone present. The heavy door to the judge's chambers slammed shut with an echo that reverberated through the silent courtroom for several seconds. No one moved. The defense attorneys exchanged panicked glances with their clients. Court personnel stood frozen at their stations. Even the typically unflappable court reporter sat with her hands suspended above her stenotype machine. Pam Bondi remained standing, her posture perfectly straight, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. When she finally moved, every eye in the room tracked her. She turned toward her team and nodded once. One of her deputies, a serious-looking man with silver-rimmed glasses, opened his briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. He crossed to the clerk's desk and handed it over with a murmured instruction. The clerk's eyes widened as she examined the document inside. "This is," she began, then stopped, clearly unsure how to proceed in such unprecedented circumstances. "A federal warrant," Bondi completed for her, voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "Properly executed by Judge Hernandez of the Southern District this morning." The 3 federal agents at the back of the courtroom now moved purposefully toward the front. Their badges identified them as FBI Public Corruption Division. The lead agent conferred briefly with Bondi before approaching the clerk to review the warrant. "Should someone inform the judge?" "Stones," the clerk asked nervously. "That won't be necessary," the lead agent replied. "We'll handle it from here." The defense table erupted in protests. The lead attorney for Harrington Industries, Marcus Welford, rose to his feet. "This is outrageous. Whatever vendetta the Attorney General is pursuing, this isn't a vendetta, Counselor. Bondi interrupted calmly. It's the culmination of an 8-month investigation conducted jointly by the FBI and the Justice Department's Public Integrity Section. The federal agents moved toward the judge's chambers. The courtroom deputy, uncertain of protocol in this situation, hesitated before stepping aside. The lead agent knocked firmly on the chamber door. When no response came, he knocked again, more insistently. Federal agents, Judge Stones, we need you to open the door. Silence. The gallery had grown so quiet that when someone shifted in their seat, the creaking sound made several people jump. Reporters scribbled frantically while the court sketch artists' pencil flew across paper. Judge Stones. The agent called again. We have a valid federal warrant. Please open the door immediately. When no response came, the agent nodded to his colleagues. One produced a small tool, and within seconds the lock clicked open. The 3 agents entered the chambers, closing the door behind them. Bondi turned to address the stunned courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, this court is in recess. I ask that everyone remain seated until federal agents complete their duties. The defense table erupted again, with attorneys demanding explanations and defendants looking increasingly panicked. Welford approached Bondi. Directly, you've orchestrated this entire spectacle, haven't you? He hissed, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. Whatever happens to Stones, our clients are still innocent until proven guilty. I'm well aware of the presumption of innocence, Counselor. Bondi replied evenly. It applies to everyone, including judges, but it doesn't shield anyone from investigation when evidence warrants it. A commotion from the direction of the chambers drew everyone's attention. The door had opened and the federal agents emerged, flanking Judge Andrew H. Stones. The judge's face was ashen, his posture rigid with shock and fury. More striking than his expression, however, were the metal handcuffs glinting on his wrists. Andrew H. Stones, the lead agent, announced formally. You are under arrest for violations of Title 18 United States Code Sections 2012 pertaining to judicial corruption, racketeering, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Several jurors covered their mouths in shock. The Baloff, a 20-year veteran of the courthouse, stood frozen in disbelief as his boss was led away in handcuffs. This is an outrage, Stones declared, his voice cracking with indignation. I demand immediate counsel in a hearing before a neutral magistrate. You'll have both, Your Honor, the agent assured him, emphasizing the title with subtle irony. The warrant includes provisions for your immediate appearance before Judge Keller in the Eastern District. Bondi remained perfectly still, her face betraying no emotion as her longtime adversary was escorted past her table. When Stones paused directly in front of her, the courtroom collectively held its breath. You've orchestrated this circus from the beginning, he accused, his voice low but intense. This won't stand. The evidence orchestrated it, Judge Stones, she replied quietly. The same evidence you refused to consider in dozens of cases that came before you. The federal agents resumed, guiding Stones toward the exit. As they reached the doors, a court administrator rushed in, clearly flustered. I've just been informed by the chief judge that all of Judge Stone's active cases are to be immediately reassigned, he announced, avoiding eye contact with the handcuffed judge, and the sealed indictment against him has been published to the court's public docket. Reporters bolted from the courtroom, racing to break the story at the defense table. Harrington's attorneys looked shell-shocked, hurriedly whispering with their clients. A junior prosecutor approached Bondi with a tablet displaying a breaking news alert. Federal judge arrested in corruption probe. Attorney General Bondi exposes years-long bribery scheme. Would you like to issue a statement, ma'am? The young attorney asked. Bondi shook her head. The indictment speaks for itself. Our job is to present the evidence in court, not in the press. The courtroom was gradually emptying, but the nervous energy remained palpable. Courthouse staff who had witnessed the arrest stood in huddled groups, processing the unprecedented event. 2 senior judges had appeared in the doorway, conferring urgently with the court administrator. One of Bondi's deputies approached with an update. Judge Montgomery has been assigned to take over the Harrington case. She scheduled a status conference for tomorrow morning. Bondi nodded, gathering her files methodically. Prepare the full evidence binders for her review tonight and make sure the witness list is updated to include the former clerks. As she prepared to leave, Bondi paused to look at the now empty judge's bench. For just a moment her professional mask slipped, revealing the weight of what had just transpired. Justice doesn't belong to anyone, she murmured almost to herself. Not to judges, not to prosecutors, not even to me. Her team waited respectfully until she straightened her shoulders and turned toward the door. Let's go, she said firmly. We have a case to prepare. Fame. By late afternoon, video footage of Judge Stones being escorted from the federal courthouse had gone viral, captured on a court reporter's smartphone. The 12-second clip showed the once powerful judge, handcuffs glinting under fluorescent lights, being guided into a waiting federal vehicle. His expression, a mixture of shock and simmering rage, would soon appear on every major news network in the country. Inside the courthouse, a Different kind of shocks settled over the remaining spectators. Court personnel moved in slow motion as if struggling to process the seismic shift that had occurred in their normally structured world. Several clerks who had worked under Stones for years stood in tight clusters, their whispered conversations punctuated by nervous glances toward his empty chambers. In 23 years on the bench, one veteran bailiff murmured, "I've never seen anything like it, never." The defense attorneys for Harrington Industries had retreated to a conference room, doors firmly closed. Through the frosted glass, their agitated silhouettes could be seen gesturing emphatically. Every few minutes someone would emerge to make urgent phone calls before disappearing back inside. Pam Bondi had established a temporary command center in a small room adjacent to the courtroom. Her team worked with quiet efficiency, processing documents and preparing for the case's transition to Judge Montgomery. Despite the victory against judicial corruption, the underlying prosecution of Harrington Industries remained their primary focus. Bondi, her chief of staff, said quietly, "The Attorney General of the United States is on line 1." Bondi took the call privately, her expression revealing nothing as she listened. When she emerged a few minutes later, her team looked up expectantly. "The Public Integrity Section will handle the Stones prosecution," she announced. "Will continue focusing on Harrington. The cases will proceed in parallel." Outside the courthouse, a media circus had formed with remarkable speed. Satellite trucks lined the street, and reporters delivered breathless updates against the backdrop of the imposing federal building. Legal analysts were already being patched in to provide context for what many were calling an unprecedented moment in judicial history. "To see a sitting federal judge arrested in his own courtroom," one commentator explained, "isn't just rare, it's essentially unheard of in modern American jurisprudence." As Bondi finally exited the building, a wall of cameras and microphones confronted her. She paused briefly on the courthouse steps, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows behind her. "Attorney General Bondi, was this arrest planned all along?" A reporter shouted. "Did you deliberately provoke Judge Stones to build your case?" Called another. "Is it true the judge was targeted because of his political connections?" Bondi raised a hand and the shouted questions subsided for several seconds. She stood silently, seemingly weighing her words with the same careful precision she had demonstrated in court. "Today's events represent neither a victory nor a tragedy," she finally stated. "They represent our justice system working as it should. No one, regardless of position, power, or title, stands above the law." She declined to answer specific questions, promising a formal press conference the following morning. As she descended the court of steps, the cameras continued rolling, capturing an image that would appear in front pages nationwide. A composed prosecutor who had faced down judicial corruption and walked away victorious, yet somber. Behind her, the chorus stood as it always had, imposing and permanent. But within its walls something fundamental had shifted. In courtrooms throughout the building, other judges had fallen uncharacteristically silent, their gavels temporarily stilled as the implications of Judge Stone's spectacular fall from grace reverberated through the halls of Justice. Chapter 8. Trial fallout and public reaction. By the following morning, Judge Andrew H. Stone's arrest had transformed from breaking news to a full-blown national sensation. Morning shows led with the story, legal blogs crashed from traffic overload, and social media erupted with hashtags ranging from "Judge and Cuffs" to "Abondist Bravery." "This represents a pivotal moment in judicial accountability," declared the Judicial Ethics Review Board in a hastily released statement. "The allegations, if proven, demonstrate the critical importance of transparency and oversight within our federal court system." In Washington, D.C., congressional leaders from both parties issued careful statements supporting the investigation while emphasizing the presumption of innocence behind closed doors. However, a different conversation raged as lawmakers debated potential reforms to judicial oversight mechanisms. At 9 trode M sharp, Pam Bondi stood before a forest of microphones in the Justice Department's main briefing room, flanked by her prosecution team and representatives from the FBI's Public Corruption Division. She presented a measured account of the investigation that had led to Stone's arrest. "The evidence suggests a pattern of judicial misconduct spanning more than 5 years," she explained, "including documented communications with defendants, financial transactions coinciding with favorable rulings, and deliberate attempts to undermine prosecutions against specific entities." She confirmed that the investigation had begun months earlier, triggered by whistleblower reports from former law clerks concerned about Stone's handling of cases involving certain corporate entities. When questioned about why she had personally appeared to argue the Harrington case despite knowing about the investigation into the Judge, Bondi's response was characteristically direct. "Justice doesn't work if prosecutors retreat from difficult courtrooms," she stated firmly. "My job was to present the government's case against Harrington Industries with the same vigor and integrity I would bring to any prosecution regardless of which judge presided across town." Judge Stones made his initial appearance before Magistrate Judge Kellergun, where his judicial robes replaced by a gray suit that seemed to hang loosely on his frame. His normally commanding presence had diminished overnight. His shoulders hunched slightly as he entered his not guilty plea. The magistrate set bail at $5 million, a figure that prompted audible murmurs in the courtroom, and ordered Stones to surrender his passport. The judge, who had once mocked attorneys from the bench, now sat silently as his own attorney argued unsuccessfully for less restrictive conditions. By mid-afternoon, the first political dominoes began to fall. Two senators who had championed Stones' judicial appointment announced they were returning campaign contributions linked to Harrington Industries. The Judicial Nomination Committee that had originally vetted Stones announced an internal review of their processes at the State Bar Association. An emergency ethics panel convened to discuss the broader implications. This case will be taught in law schools for generations, one panelist noted. It's the textbook example of why judicial temperament matters as much as legal knowledge. For Pam Bondi, the media storm brought both professional respect and personal challenges. Security around her was quietly increased after several threatening messages were received at her office. Yet for every threat came dozens of messages of support from attorneys who had endured Stone's courtroom ridicule, from law students inspired by her composure under fire, and from citizens heartened to see that even the powerful could be held accountable. Late that evening, as the news cycle finally began to shift toward other stories, Bondi sat alone in her office reviewing briefs for the Harrington case. The headline on a discarded newspaper caught her eye: "Just Steve the judge who mocked until the handcuffs clicked." She pushed the paper aside and returned to her work. The spectacle was over, but the substance, the painstaking building of a case against corporate corruption, continued. It would never generate the same headlines as a judge in handcuffs, but it was the work that had brought her to that courtroom in the first place. In cases across America, judges took the bench the following morning with a new awareness of the scrutiny they faced. Some welcomed it as a necessary check on judicial power. Others resented the implied questioning of their integrity. But not one could deny that the landscape had shifted. As for Andrew H. Stones, his name had already been removed from his courthouse door, a printout reading "Courtroom 7A" hung in its place, a small but telling symbol of how quickly even the most established power could dissolve when justice finally caught up. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.